Oh, hello. You must have just walked in on me being casual. But I'll tell you what you'll never catch me being, and that's a filthy casual. Game on! On! Well, computer, what are we going to talk about today?
Today we will talk about The Last of Us Part 2.
The Last of Us Part 2? But aren't we living that life every day now?
Naughty Dog's latest game and sequel to their universally acclaimed Last of Us in 2013 has garnered strong critical reaction and become the fastest selling PS4 exclusive of all time. But it has not been without its detractors, trolls, and divisive internet anger. I mean, without a Star Wars movie this year and with Game of Thrones finished, we had to get divisive about something. There's nothing else to do this year. What do you want us to do? Be civil?
I'm joking around with those a little. I might get back to that in a minute. But what I do want to talk about is my opinion of the original game and of Naughty Dog games in general. So, I've played the original game now maybe 3 times. I genuinely think it might be one of my favourite games of all time. I think it's a really, really great game. It had universal acclaim and people really loved it. As for the rest of Naughty Dog's games, I've played, I think, all of them. And in my opinion, at least, they've never really dropped the ball. And I know there's a lot of fans that feel the same way, and yet they feel that this is the first time that Naughty Dog have truly missed. I might get to that in a minute when I talk a bit about spoilers, but until then, let's talk first about the gameplay. With the gameplay, it feels like Naughty Dog has blended what has worked for them in the past. We have some of the game mechanics and variety that we saw in The Last of Us Left Behind. We have a few more platforming elements and puzzle elements that are coming over from the Uncharted series, and we have a more open world compared to what we got in the last game that's very reminiscent of Uncharted The Lost Legacy. This balance of gameplay means that the game feels relatively fresh and is in general quite enjoyable to play. The game is at its best when you're stealthily dispatching enemies with your arsenal of weapons. I will say though that the zombies sort of felt like an afterthought in the game. They're often just thrown in there when there feels like there's a gap in combat in the gameplay. And they're not entirely interesting. There's not a great new variety of zombies. There's a few. But generally speaking, they feel a bit tired. But thankfully, there's plenty of humans in the game to fight as well. And the humans in the game are fantastic. They have a great level of AI. Maybe not towards the beginning, but as the game goes on, they have a great level of AI that can make them a bit unpredictable. And at times you actually get overrun. But it also means that the game is a lot of fun when you're stealthily trying to take out large groups of enemies. I'll even admit there was times when I restarted encounters so I could go about it again. Naturally, in a game that's all about the lack of supplies and resources and a crumbling world, a lot of the game is going to be spent scavenging. And while that could be very monotonous to some, I will admit that I actually quite enjoyed it because I liked being in this world that the game had created and going around and finding notes and finding different resources to make weapons was something I actually quite enjoyed. There's a great variety of weapons in the game. Some are carryovers from the previous game, but there's enough variety to make it different. But I will say, you will end up using some more than others, or not at all. I'm looking at you, Stunbomb. If there's one element to me that felt very clunky, it's the hand-to-hand fighting. Naughty Dog have never really nailed this in my opinion. It's one button to dodge and one button to hit. It's just very boring and predictable, and in elements where you have to rely on it, it just shows how formulaic and quite lackluster these big moments can be. Graphically, they really got the most out of the PS4 for this game. It's absolutely stunning. The character models are overall pretty good. Some of the ones they carried over from the previous game look like they've got a bit of a polish, and of course we're dealing with characters who have aged as well, but generally speaking, they look pretty good. If I had one complaint as far as character models go, it's that the enemy troops can be a little bit samey. They really could have done with a bit more variety there. It would have helped nail some of the key themes as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. But overall, some of the most beautiful moments in this game are just the environments. The stormy sea, the light breaking through the trees in the forest, leaving footprints in the snow, or just watching fire take over buildings. It's really memorable and a gorgeous game to look at. It really provides moments of beauty in a game that is at times so harsh and miserable. The voice acting and the motion capture for the game are also excellent. You really get invested in these characters, even some of the new characters, and it also makes you fall for some of the same old characters over again. But let's be honest, you're not here to hear about any of that. You're only here because you want to hear about the story. spoilers. Okay, so this story has faced a lot of scrutiny and criticism, not least of which because it was leaked beforehand. So now some people are reading about the story and experiencing the story in a way it wasn't meant to be experienced. You're meant to play through this, and some people have read it online or seen the controversy before they played it, and I wonder if that can affect people's opinion of the game somewhat. But anyway, the broad strokes are that the story picks up 5 years after the original. Joel and Ellie are living in Jackson. Abby, a member of the Washington Liberation Front, the WLF, are monitoring the settlement hoping to get revenge on a member of the group, which we later find out is Joel, who she manages to capture along with his brother Tommy, whereupon she beats him to death with a golf club. Ellie witnesses his murder and vows revenge. I know this has really been a point of contention for some people, that Joel is killed so viciously and violently. Personally, though, we kind of told Joel's story in the last game. I feel like we'd said everything we needed to say with that character. Where else do you take him? Again, some people really wanted another Joel and Ellie adventure, and yeah, that would be good, but we did that the last time. So his death, having it so early on, was shocking to me. I kind of expected that he might die, but not so early on. Certainly we were misled by some of the marketing.
What the hell are you doing here?
I think I'd let you do this on your own.
I think I'd let you do this on your own.
But at least personally, I feel like Joel was always going to die, and the fact that they did it so early on and so viciously upset me. And that was the reaction they wanted. So I was fine with it personally. It carried the right emotional weight that it should. From here, we have Ellie seeking revenge along with her girlfriend Dina by going after and hunting down members of the Washington Liberation Front in Seattle. Things get uncomfortably violent, and that's entirely the point. The obvious message of the game is revenge is bad. Insert Confucius quote here. However, it's about midway through the game where things take a pretty drastic change up, and that's also really annoying people. So as Ellie, you're going down and hunting down and killing members of the WLF who were involved with Joel's death, until you only have one person left.
Dramatic.
Is he alright?
Pause!
Abby. At which point the cinematic plays where Abby has managed to sneak up on Ellie and her friends. She kills one of Ellie's friends, and with Tommy under her boot and a gun pointed at his head, and...
Pause!
Cliffhanger. At which point you go back to Ellie's first day in Seattle, this time from Abby's perspective. This is a problem a lot of people had with the game, because now you've got to play as the bad guy, Joel's killer. And some people had that problem. Other people had the problem of they felt lied to and misled that you are now playing as Raiden. Abby. Well, I'll say this. I actually didn't mind the Abby section of the game. In fact, parts of it I thought were better than Ellie's section. There's a nice variety to the gameplay, and I was interested in the story, and it really helped expand the world. Now, all that being said, I think it helped more importantly set up the symmetry between Ellie and Abby, which was pivotal to the kind of story and themes that they were going for, and this whole mixed morality idea, which I guess, spoilers, it's a bit late for that, but Abby is the daughter of the surgeon Joel killed in the last game, who was going to operate on Ellie in hopes of finding a cure. So, you know, revenge is a vicious cycle, and an eye for an eye, and Confucius quote again. So my problem then really wasn't with Abby. As I said, I quite enjoyed some of Abby's sections, and by the end of it, I thought she was a decent character that I was invested in. My problem is more with the structure of the game, and we get a lot of flashbacks and other moments throughout the game that create a symmetry between Abby and Ellie. For example, we have flashbacks with Joel and Ellie, and we have flashbacks of Abby and her dad. And they do a really good job of humanizing who we thought was the villain and demonizing who we thought was the hero. Naughty Dog obviously want this idea of kind of complex characters with a mixed morality, and they've always toyed with this idea in the past, even at like the ending of Uncharted 2 kind of hinted at it.
You think I am a monster, but you're no different from me, Blake. How many men have you killed? How many just today?
But here they finally pulled the trigger on it. But the structure is totally fucked. Okay, so since we played the first half of the game as Ellie, we know how a lot of the stories and characters in Abby's story end up dead. So it's kind of hard to get invested in her story when we're going, oh, well, we're not going to get resolution here because obviously this is when this character dies. And does it make us feel bad in retrospect now that these characters are more human? Yeah, sort of, I guess. It's not entirely successful though, because of the structure. Sometimes you could have killed these characters long ago. Some of these characters are not even that memorable anyway. It would probably have been more effective if they rejigged the structure a bit so there wasn't such a wide gap between them. But the problem is that gap, because as much as Ellie has half the game and Abby has half the game, these halves are so disconnected from each other. Like, Abby doesn't know Ellie is after her, for one. Because of that, Abby doesn't even seem to know that a lot of the characters are dead until much later. They don't interact in any way, or even come close or affect each other's stories really, until the cliffhanger, which happens in a cutscene. So because of that, they feel wholly disconnected. Even the themes, while there is some similar ideas and themes, Abby's story has a lot more theories and themes about gender and identity, which I know the internet loves to discuss civilly. But it's totally different. It goes its own way. It has some separate things it wants to say and do. But the biggest problem really is that Ellie, having killed a lot of these characters in the first half of the game, means that we already know how a lot of Abby's story ends up. We know this character has kicked the bucket, so it's harder to get invested in them. Which means that it's harder to get invested in half of the story, which is a major problem. And the bigger problem is that since there's such a gap between the cliffhanger, between the end of Ellie's half of the game and then the end of Abby's half of the game, the tension that we had in that moment has almost entirely dissipated. It sort of reminded me of The Walking Dead in that regard. And I don't mean the zombie comparisons. I meant the structure and production side of it. Like, remember a couple of years ago we had a season cliffhanger of The Walking Dead that ended with the introduction of Negan. And it was a very well done scene. And then he killed someone, but it's not made clear to the viewer who it is. Which left us all with a massive cliffhanger. And when the show finally returned in 5 months, we found out who he killed. And it was shocking, I guess, but in those 5 months between ending and starting up again, we had already imagined every possibility. And because of that, the tension and the shock was really diluted. And that's the case here. Because we have a cliffhanger, we've kind of imagined every possible outcome. And because of that, it no matter what outcome you get, is not going to be satisfying. I think Naughty Dog tried to explore a lot of interesting themes and ideas. The problem is they kind of felt like they were too afraid to pull the trigger on anything definitive. They wanted to satisfy everyone. And as a result, things can be a bit muddled. And some of the characters kind of have been sold out, so has the story. For example, when we get to that cliffhanger, we're kind of almost anticipating that Ellie could be killed now, because we just spent the last 10 hours realizing that the person that we thought was the good guy wasn't really the good guy. So a certain part of us is thinking, okay, well, maybe she's going to face consequences for her actions. And she doesn't. Abby spares her for the second time in the game. Abby spares Ellie dying. And then we go to about a year later, and Ellie now has, she's settled down with Dina. She's got a ranch. She's got a kid. She still has PTSD, and then she decides, I'm going to go get revenge again. If we're meant to try to feel a little bit better about Ellie not being a bad person, this isn't it. Because now she's going to get revenge again. How has she not learned by now that revenge is a vicious cycle? How many times do we have to have this lesson?
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson?
Personally, the fact that she's still going for revenge after being spared twice and having seen the effect of it, it's a character flaw. To me, she's not a bad person per se. We already know she's flawed, But it really just made the character seem very shallow and, quite frankly, stupid. So in our epilogue of the game, we play as Ellie again as she goes to get revenge on Abby again. Which is fun, but it kind of feels like we're just repeating ourselves a bit now. Like, this is essentially what the game started off being already. And I get the idea that eventually it leads to Ellie forgiving Abby because she doesn't have a chance to forgive Joel like she promised she would. But it kind of feels like we have had this message already ad nauseum. I don't know why Ellie had to go through all this again to learn that message. She probably should have learned it the first time. But even that aside, it just really felt like Naughty Dog were afraid to kill Abby after making her out to be less of a villain. And they were afraid to kill Ellie because she's our fan favourite hero. And as a result of that, we got an ending that didn't necessarily satisfy anyone. A lot of people want Abby dead because of she killed Joel. But when we really step back and think about it, Joel isn't a good guy. And that game really kind of tries to push that idea on us. But some people are just not going to budge on it. I mean, if you look at the original game, the story of it was quite simple, but people kind of took the ending the wrong way at times. Like, you know, it's like, yay, Joel got a surrogate daughter. No, the cure for humanity and all these probably innocent people. The problem with the story is that it's a bit more complex and layered this time, but the structure really fights against it. And as a result of that, some of the themes and ideas in the game can be glaring obvious from the get-go and repeated until they get grating. Now, maybe I'm expecting a bit too much from a Naughty Dog game, but if nothing else, they've succeeded in crafting complex characters who it hurts to watch kill or be killed. At times it's an uncomfortable game to play, which I think speaks to, if nothing else, that they've tried to create something ambitious and unique. As for the discourse surrounding the game, there are certainly plenty of valid criticisms towards The Last of Us Part 2, some of which I've mentioned. And it's okay to be upset that your favourite character was killed so viciously and violently. But when all is said and done, characters are there to serve a story, and when your story is about a post-apocalyptic world, then Joel, and indeed someday Ellie's days, are always going to be numbered.
It's called luck, and it is going to run out.
I also wonder if perhaps the leaks could have affected the game somehow, because people now, of course, were able to examine the plot long before and tear into it and see it kind of in isolated parts and not experience it in the way it was meant to be experienced. And it seems like any time a plot or of a movie or a TV show or a video game ever does leak, the only talk about it is negative and that the final product is inevitably bad. But I don't think this is a bad product. So I feel like the discourse when something is leaked can slightly be altered. Now, we could also say that some people might be going after the game for its LGBT representation or having such a predominance of female characters in the game. I'll let you be the judge of that. I don't really want to wade into those murky waters. If nothing else, I think Naughty Dog succeeded in expanding the world of The Last of Us, the lore, and even maybe giving us a few interesting and expanded views of characters, even if some of the characters are characters that you might hate. With all that said, it probably sounds like I hated The Last of Us Part 2. But I didn't. The gameplay is excellent. The story is pretty flawed, though. There is a lot of elements here that they at least tried to do something new with. They tried to do something a bit more in examining the morality of our video game characters, which, in my opinion at least, is a bit overdue. I do think at times that the themes are muddled and a lot of times incredibly blatant to the point that it's almost insulting to the player, but it didn't take away from my overall experience. At times it is a nasty and miserable experience, but that's in fitting with its themes and its ideas. Personally, I never felt The Last of Us needed a sequel anyway. Do I feel that the sequel is necessary now that I've played it? No. But what I do want out of sequels generally is that it's not more of the same, that we go a little bit deeper into the characters and story. This certainly did that. We often complain about the mundanity of video game stories, but at least this one tried to do something. It was ambitious, and while it wasn't always successful, it often failed, it is at least admirable in its failings. While I can't get behind every story decision or creative decision, nonetheless, The Last of Us 2 is a stunning achievement, if an imperfect one.
We could have killed you.
Maybe you should have.
Do you know what the worst part of The Last of Us 2 was? The women.